Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. I trust you had a great weekend. I'm looking forward to the week. I'd like to thank Nazifo and David Williams of CNBC for the interview earlier today. I had a terrible coughing fit and it all had to be cut short, I'm afraid. We've uploaded the MindSpeak session with the National Bank CEO Munir Ahmed. And there's another link there as well for a post-MindSpeak interview I did with Munir. And I've linked up with one of the twit pics I took of Munir, where he said meritocracy and justice are my moral compass. I certainly am looking forward to being in Maputo from Wednesday for the government of Mozambique and IMF conference on Thursday and Friday, convening a high-level conference in 2014 to take stock of Africa's strong economic performance, its increased resilience to shocks, and the key ongoing economic policy challenges. The Africa Rising Conference will be held on May 29 and May 30 in Maputo. The event is intended to follow up on the 2009 Tanzania Conference, which helped galvanize international support for Africa after the 2008 financial crisis. There's a link for the agenda. The venue is the Joaquim Chissano International Conference Center. And the last time I was in Maputo was in June 2012, when I wrote greetings from the Serena Hotel, Polana, Maputo. I can confirm that Maputo is the land of wonderful and flavoursome tiger prawns. The architecture is also deliciously retro. By the way, the Polana was built in 1922, and the flavour is fabulously Riviera and very swanky. Of course, Mozambique has popped large onto the global radar because of gas reserves that have been discovered offshore and in the deep sea. I've said before that I believe the eastern seaboard of Africa is clearly the last great energy prize in the 21st century, and I believe this lake of hydrocarbons stretches from Mozambique up through Tanzania, Kenya and Somalia. We remain in the early stage of this discovery process here. Mozambique is further along the curve. I think Mozambique is the next Qatar. I'll put up a photograph of a statue of Samora Machel in the Praça de Independencia in Maputo, and a photograph I took of Maputo from the sea at sunset. Christine Lagarde was our guest at MindSpeak in January. That link is also on Rich Wrap-Ups. I'd like to thank Marco Silvi, the deputy at the Italian Embassy, for a lovely dinner on Friday. He really is a very accomplished host and an Epicurean. And then I like this photograph that was tweeted by Ruhan Rabin, by Maria too, and it's of folks on the beach, and I rather liked it. Political reflections, far-right parties sweep EU polls. Far-right anti-European Union parties have made sweeping gains in the European Parliament election. Voters in 21 of the EU's 28 nations went to the polls on Sunday, choosing politicians for the bloc's 751-seat legislature. The other 7 countries in the bloc had already voted in a sprawling exercise of democracy that began on Thursday in Britain and the Netherlands. One of the most significant winners was France's far-right National Front Party, which was the outright winner in France with 26% support. The anti-immigration, anti-EU party should win about 25 of France's 74 seats in the parliament. The party currently holds 3 seats. Marine Le Pen, the National Front's leader, said the people have spoken loud and clear. They no longer want to be led by those outside our borders, by EU commissioners and technocrats who are unelected. The French Prime Minister Manuel Valls, in an impassioned televised speech, called the National Front win serious, very serious for France, for Europe. It's an earthquake, he said. Nigel Farage, leader of Britain's fiercely anti-EU UKIP party, looks set to score an historic victory over both the Conservatives and Labour. I don't just want Britain to leave the European Union, Farage said. I want Europe to leave the European Union. And it's been pretty much across the board, Greece, Austria, Germany as well. And essentially Europe has turned right, not unexpectedly given the fallout from the austerity and the post-banking crisis policy. And of course, got so many young people who are unemployed as well. Russia-China gas deal concerning, says Harvard's Kaplan on Bloomberg TV, and I think that's an understatement. US has been triangulated by Russia and China, in my view. China and Japan trade blame over fighter jets. Japan and China have traded accusations after China scrambled fighter jets when Japanese military aircraft entered an air defense zone declared by Beijing over the East China Sea. China's defense ministry said on Sunday that 2 Japanese planes entered the defense zone the previous day during a joint military drill with the Chinese and Russian navies. A ministry statement demanded that Japan stop all reconnaissance and interference activities as Japanese military planes intruded on the exercise's airspace without permission and carried out dangerous actions in a serious violation of international laws and standards, which could have easily caused a misunderstanding and even led to a mid-air accident, the statement said. China declared its air defense zone last year, despite protests by Japan and the United States. According to Tokyo's defense ministry, a Japanese surveillance aircraft OP-3C was approached closely by a Chinese fighter jet on the same day. Shortly after, Tokyo claimed that another Chinese fighter jet came as close as 30 meters to another Japanese aircraft. This time it is completely out of the ordinary that they come so close to our aircraft which was flying over the international sea. I really think this was totally out of line action, said Itsunori Onodera, Japanese defense minister. It's all very finely calibrated in a game of cat and mouse. China stays, I think, on an incremental course and just below the radar of an American hand being forced. The question with respect to Japan is around the leash and how tight President Obama has Shinzo Abe on that leash. And I think Japan evidently was seeking to reconfirm that the pivot has not been defanged. I wrote about this on the 2nd of December last year when I said the pivot to Asia bears its fangs. And I was saying that China had declared an air defense identification zone in an area that included rocky islands, which are called Senkakus by the Japanese and Diaoyu by the Chinese. The US responded to the declaration of the ADIZ by flying 2 B-52s directly into it. And that message is kind of incontestable. I said then, the US probably feels it holds a decisive hard power advantage at this moment, and given that the trajectory is one of gradual erosion of that decisive advantage, leads me to the view that this pivot to Asia has a logic and momentum of its own. Therefore, I see the US being increasingly determined to press its advantage. That's what I feel. I'll put up a photograph of the B-52. I'll put up a photograph of the snake by Ai Weiwei, which for me best symbolizes the policy of containment. Japan will continue surveillance activities around its waters after Chinese jets made a dangerous approach to its intelligence-gathering planes. The incident was the closest recorded encounter between Chinese and Japanese military planes since the founding of the People's Republic of China in 1949. Jumping to Syria, I like this from Counterpunch. It's a well-known fact that creating a humanitarian crisis in Syria, whether real or fabricated, and holding the Syrian government responsible for it as a casus belli for foreign military intervention under the UN 2005 so-called Responsibility to Protect initiative, was from the very beginning of the Syrian conflict the goal. Pope Francis has visited Israel's separation barrier in Bethlehem. I'll put up a photograph, and this is how it's described in The Guardian, an image that will define Pope Francis's first official visit to the Holy Land Head bowed in prayer, the leader of the Catholic Church pressed his palm against the graffiti-covered concrete of Israel's imposing separation wall, a Palestinian girl holding a flag by his side. It was, as his aides conceded later, a silent statement against a symbol of division and conflict. I think he's quite compelling, in point of fact. And I'll put up a photograph of a selfie that was taken not too long ago. Coming to the currency markets, the euro was at 136.40, touched 136.15 early this morning, which was the weakest since February the 13th. Dollar index is at 80.41 and largely going higher because of the euro weakness. Japanese yen 101.92, Swissy 0.8966, pound 168.41, Aussie 0.9238. Indian rupee 58.532, and that's within 0.3% of an 11-month high, and I think it's going to push and create a new 11-month high. South Korean won 10.2405, Rial 222.23, Egyptian pound weaker still 713.76, South African rand 1032.70. Euro has declined 1.5% in the past month and is the worst performer after the Swiss franc among the 10 developed nation currencies tracked by Bloomberg correlation weighted indices. Dollars up 0.3%, the yen up 0.5%. I'll put up a 3-month chart of the dollar index. We're now near the top of the range. It's been lifted higher by euro weakness, in my view. Euro dollar, I'll put up a 3-month chart. I think we're going to, go lower from here. We're around 136.40. And we've declined since touching a 2.5-year high of 139.93 on May 8th. When Draghi essentially said he was comfortable with adding more stimulus as soon as next month, June 5th. And he's actually due to make a speech later today. Dollar yen, 101.92. I think there's still an outside chance dollar yen goes to 95. The S&P closed at a record and above 1900 for the first time. I'll put up a chart from Yahoo. Gold, 1292.44, trades without any conviction in my view. Investors keep on cutting net long positions on gold for a second straight week to 90,358 contracts in the weekend of May 20. I think that's going to continue lower on balance. Crude oil, 104.02. It's expensive, but I think you can get as high as 105.50 if the squeeze comes in. There's no floor trading in New York today because of the US Memorial holiday, and transactions will be booked tomorrow for settlement purposes. Narendra Modi will be sworn in as India's Prime Minister today in a ceremony that his Pakistani counterpart will attend. Indian President Pranab Mukherjee will preside over the event due to start at 6 p.m. the colonial-era presidential palace in New Delhi. Pakistani Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif will join heads of state or representatives from the 8-nation South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation. As a goodwill gesture, Sri Lanka and Pakistan plan to release more than 150 Indian fishermen who have been taken into custody after allegedly straying into foreign territorial waters. It has been a greatly symbolic week of thawing tensions in South Asia, said B.G. Verghese, visiting professor at the Center for Policy Research in New Delhi. First, the invitations, their confirmation, and then the release of prisoners. These are all great first steps that should have been made long ago. Now the pressure is on Modi and all of the SAARC leaders to deliver so these don't end up as empty gestures. Afghan President Hamid Karzai, Maldives President Abdullah Yameen, Sri Lankan President Mahinda Rajapaksa, Nepal Prime Minister Sushil Koirala, Bhutan Prime Minister Shering Tobgay, Mauritius Prime Minister Navin Chandra Ramgoolam, and Shirin Chowdhury, Bangladesh Parliamentary Speaker, will attend. So clearly, he's moved with some dispatch on these serious issues. Indian rupee, I'll put up a 1-year chart, 58.56. I think it targets 57.50. Sensex at fresh record highs. I'll put up a long-term chart for you to have a look at. Narendra Modi, I'll put up a photograph of him. There's certainly been a bullish dividend from his very clear-cut victory. Sub-Saharan Africa, the reality is that foreign investors come to Africa to make money, and not to be part of the solution to Africa's economic problems. This is the Zimbabwean Finance Minister Patrick Chinamasa. Well, pennies dropped finally, and there's been definitely a sea change in the rhetoric coming out of the Zimbabwean authorities, and it's noteworthy. Al-Shabaab attacked the Somali parliament, at least 10 dead. Attacks started with a car bomb at a gate to the heavily fortified parliament compound, followed by a suicide bombing, and then a gun battle that continued for hours. We are behind the suicide bombing, explosions, and the fighting inside the so-called Somali Parliament House, and still heavy fighting is going on inside, said the Al-Shabaab spokesman. Diplomats at the attack showed that a surge by the African Union peacekeeping troops had not weakened Al-Shabaab's capacity to wage asymmetric warfare in the capital. Because intelligence is fragmented, Al-Shabaab is slipping through the nets of the diplomat. Things are becoming more dangerous. In neighboring Djibouti, at least 2 people were killed on Saturday in double grenade blasts at a busy restaurant popular with Westerners in Djibouti, police said. Take you back to that article that Jay Bahadur wrote, from which I quoted, where he said, referencing Kenya, a proliferation of complex attacks using a combination of gunmen and suicide bombers, strikes on government buildings, and perhaps even targeted assassinations against Kenyan politicians and security forces officials may be in Kenya's future. Then I wrote that piece, The Dashboard is Blinking Amber, where I quoted Don DeLillo and Point Omega, when you strip away surfaces, when you see into it, what's left is terror. This is the thing that literature was meant to cure, the epic poem, the bedtime story. And I must admit I'd put it in all of Don DeLillo's books, which I took delivery of yesterday. I'm pretty pleased with that. African spending spree faces punishment by markets. Resource-reliant Ghana and Zambia show how star economic performers can quickly face the heat. Ghana's Cedi and Zambia's Kwacha have hit record lows against the dollar this year, as rising spending has strained state finances. It's as if we haven't learned anything about macroeconomic management, said Mutuli Cube, chief economist at the African Development Bank. The macro policies are out of line, whether you're looking at budget deficits, current account positions, the debt positions, and so forth, he said. And then this was an interesting comment that Razia Khan made. Market access for any sovereign seen to have mismanaged its fiscal affairs might alter quite dramatically. And I think that was the point I was making when I wrote that piece about recurrent expenditure being Africa's Achilles heel, and I referenced Ghana and Zambia. South African all shares up 9.56% this year and at a fresh all-time high. I'll put up a photograph of South African Air Force jets flying over a statue of Nelson Mandela at the Union Buildings in Pretoria. Dollar versus Rand, I'll put up a 6-month chart, last at 10.3263, and for a while I've been calling for 10. The Rand has gained 1.9% against the dollar since the beginning of January, after sliding 19% last year. Zuma promotes Landla Nene to South Africa Finance Minister. That caught me off guard. I thought they'd come back with Pravin. Egyptian pound, 713.73. We slipped through 7. We're probably going to bounce once we see a definitive victory. LCC. This was an interesting article in Bloomberg. You saw all those people in Tahrir, and it was impossible not to believe it would bring the change we wanted. Subsequently, foreign investors dumped almost all of their £59 billion of government debt since the start of unrest in 2011. Foreign reserves are today 50% of their December 2010 levels. The stalled economy has bred a wave of protests and street crime. And this lady who's being interviewed looks at her daughter and son on mattresses and then up at the post of LCC. Don't deceive us, she said. Put up a photograph of CC that came from Reuters World. Egyptians, I'll put up another photograph of Egyptians waving their national flag as army helicopters fly over Cairo's Tahrir Square. Egyptian stock market is up 31.06% this year, Africa's best. And I said in January 2014, if the equity markets had a vote in Egypt, Army Chief General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi would actually get one of those impossible to believe votes of 99.8%. Nigerian all shares down 0.41% this year. Ghana Stock Exchange, where you've had a free-falling steady erode all your 5.32% returns and some. Harun Matassa tweeted this photograph of army in some areas of Blantyre. The Malawian president ordered an election rerun, but her decision was, I think, ignored. Malawi's High Court has rejected a decision by President Joyce Banda to annul this week's general election. But apparently they're going to go back and do some manual counting. But clearly she's not in the frame. Madonna has seized on the political chaos in Malawi to attack its President Joyce Banda, claiming to have witnessed the depth of corruption in her government. I'm so sad to see that because of the actions of their president, Malawians will continue to suffer. In my philanthropic work, I've seen the depths of corruption in Malawi's government. I can only hope that change will come. Malawians deserve so much better. On that note, I'll put up a link for 4 Minutes by Madonna. I am interested in coming out of the bush to start my party work for the presidential election. This is Dhlakama, Mozambique's opposition Renamo presidential candidate, is looking to participate in the process, so that's a good sign. The Tanzanian shilling has depreciated 0.6% in the past 5 days and is Africa's worst performer, East Africa's worst performer this year, falling 4.2%. I saw this photograph, which I liked, from The Guardian. People protest against French soldiers after 3 people were killed when Muslims with machetes and rifles clashed with French peacekeeping troops trying to disarm rebels. Coming to Kenya, I got this quote from the East African, but, he added, they don't trust that we can do anything about it. I don't think they take us seriously. And this is Mr. Mbishwe, said that Western intelligence services must have shared with Kenya any information they have about any looming terror threats. But he added, they don't trust that we can do anything about it. I don't think they take us seriously. Murithi Ndegwa, the CEO of the Kenya Tourism Board, said Kenya's brand equity as a destination is at stake and is quite eroded due to these incidents. We are here to say Kenya is open for business despite the ongoing challenges. Tourism was on its knees and has essentially been decapitated now for this year. Spate of attacks in Kenya has reduced occupancies in companies including Hemingway's Holdings, which has spent $25 million building hotels in Nairobi, at the coast and in the Masai Mara region. According to CEO Alistair Addison, from this month Hemingway shut down its coastal hotel for 6 weeks and put staff on leave because of poor bookings. The attacks came ahead of Kenya's high season for tourists. The end of June, July and August accounts for almost 80% of the industry's annual revenue. If we lose that, a lot of companies will not be able to continue. Frankly, they will just shut up shop. Kenya shilling is last at 87.823. I think it might have managed to hold below 88. Bear in mind this is a moment when a lot of full year dividends are being upstreamed to parent companies. And therefore it's a period of secular weakness for the shilling. Nairobi NSE 20 is negative 0.02% in 2014, and there's a link if you care to look at any share price and its relevant data. Once again, thank you for stopping by. As I said, I'll be away from Wednesday in Maputo, but you can follow what's happening over there on Twitter via my Twitter handle at Alikhan Satchu, ALYKHANSATCHU. Once again, thank you for stopping by.